Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So hello everybody, my name is Mark Sage and I'm the Executive Director of the AREA Augmented Reality Enterprise Alliance, and welcome along to the latest AREA webinar. I'm very excited to be talking today about developing AR and VR for public safety. I think it's a really interesting webinar. I'm excited and I'll introduce our speaker a bit later, but this is part of the AREA Research Committee, brought to you by that group. I'd like to explain that we have a number of different webinars that we've done over the past probably 3 years now. These are all available on the AREA YouTube channel, or you can find them on the AREA portal. Please go and have a look at them. There's all sorts of different webinars ranging from industry specific to best practice to deep dives into safety and security and other kind of challenges within the AR space. And we'll continue to run these webinars to help develop the thought leadership of the area. Just wanted to let you know that there's another AREA webinar from the AREA Safety Committee that will be happening later this week on Thursday. If you go to the AREA website and look at the events page, you're able to sign up there. Please take a look. Some of our safety committee members will be talking about some of the challenges that they've overcome and some of the benefits they've gained from working within the AREA Safety Committee. And I'm excited to be working with Boeing and Welsh Water to present that webinar for you. Okay, but today I'm very excited to have Scott Ledgerwood from the NIST organization, National Institute of Standards and Technology. Scott is a real expert in this space, and it's going to be amazing to listen to him talk about the work that he's doing and what the future plans are. I'd like to remind you that there are opportunities to ask questions. The webinar will be around 40 minutes, give or take a few, and Scott's kindly said that he would answer some of the questions. So I would ask you on your webinar panel to go into the questions box and please ask any questions. The recording of this webinar will be made available and we'll send that to you after the call. And also, if we can't get through all the questions due to time constraints or a little bit more work is doing it, Scott has kindly said that he will follow up with those questions, or I'll follow up as well. So thank you for him. Just before we start, just wanted to talk a little bit about the area for the organizations and people who don't know too much about what we're doing. As it says, the area is the only global membership-funded non-profit alliance. We only focus on the enterprise AR space, and we're about helping to accelerate the adoption of AR through supporting the growth of a comprehensive ecosystem. I'm excited to say that we've just hit 60 members. Our membership are in 3 different kind of segments. We have companies or enterprises that are or have deployed AR solutions. We have companies who provide AR solutions ranging from software, platforms, wearables, and some interesting supporting technologies like gesture control, content creation, content extraction. And we also work with non-commercial organizations, research institutes, government agencies, and universities who often bring that leading edge thinking and work. And again, NIST is one of our non-commercial organization members. The area basically focuses on 4 pillars to our strategy. The first one is thought leadership. We believe it's very important that we can create, collect and curate neutral, up-to-date information, the kind of information that business decision makers need to help them to understand and to invest in AR. So we want to develop clear what the use cases are, so what problems can be solved, examples of those being solved in real life, so case studies, what technologies are needed, and what we find really important is return on investment, the ROI. So we deliver that through multiple channels. Networking is also very important. and the ability for us to come together, to learn from each other, to build partnership, to share experiences. With the industry so new, it's really great to be able to share and learn from other organizations as they've gone through the process. The third pillar is around educate and making sure we have a steady set of skilled workers coming into the industry. So we're working with universities and other educational organizations to help them define courses, to work with them to create those next set of skilled workers. And we offer anything from guest lecturing to setting challenges to outplacements and anything we can do to create that next set of skilled workers. And then finally, and probably some of our biggest work at the moment, is about reducing barriers to adoption. We see in the industry lots of proof of concepts, pilots, prototypes going on, but actually, we want them to become full deployments. So we have been developing a set of what we call committees. They're basically monthly meetings, virtual meetings, to focus on understanding, classifying and prioritizing some of the risks and issues. So we've been focusing on things like AR security, safety, and we've developed a single set of requirements and continuing to push that out into the ecosystem. We have a marketing committee, which is about pushing the thought leadership side, a human factors looking at the UX and UI around AR, and then a very strong research capability where we ask our area members to come up with research proposals. We have a pitching session, then we have a voting kind of session, and then whichever research idea gets the most votes, the area then delivers and funds that research on behalf of the area members. So kind of a really excellent way of getting into that deep detail to help your business accelerate its AR adoption. Anyway, enough about the area. I'm really excited to introduce Scott Ledgerwood. I've been lucky enough to be working with Scott for a while now. He is a real expert in this space, and particularly around the AR and VR for public safety. He's going to talk about the work that he's been doing. And Scott, can I hand over to you to take us through the presentation? And thank you very much for joining us on the webinar today.
Great. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction and the opportunity to share a little bit about what NIST PSCR is working on in regards to AR and VR development for public safety. So today, sorry, there's a brief lag in the slide deck. There we go. So today, I'd like to share a little bit about NIST PSCR, who we are, and what we work on, and then talk a little bit about the benefits of prototyping in VR. We recently had a market search conducted where a company called Yet2 investigated what the traditional cost for R&D cycle and early usability prototyping typically run. So we'll share some insights that they found from that. We'll talk a little bit about developing our virtual reality environments and scenarios in-house through collaboration with our public safety colleagues. We'll touch on a prize challenge example on how we leverage some of these environments and encourage innovators and developers to use these virtual environments to essentially develop and test future user interfaces. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we go about measuring the usability of these new technologies. But first, I'd like to start with some examples of the traditional environments that we find our public safety community operating in. When I say public safety, a lot of times people already have a mental picture of what a police officer or firefighter or EMS tech looks like. But when you look at the discipline as a whole, it goes far beyond that in regards to how they operate, where they operate, what they use to conduct their job. Oftentimes you find them in the heat and in the cold, in the air, and even below the water surface. Surrounded by noise and large crowds, and in complete silence, perhaps by themselves. And oftentimes in low visibility environments, whether that's from smoke or just having to operate in near darkness. And potentially even high above ground. Quite often, they are using equipment that is restrictive and can make it very challenging to interact with the technologies that they use to conduct their operations. And we find that their hands are often occupied, whether that's using the equipment or interacting with their patients, and that dexterity and ergonomics are really critical. So we'll take a look at a use case that public safety is faced with quite often, and that's a large-scale incident. So maintaining a common operation picture is really imperative to a success of any operation. And when you have a large-scale incident, not only do you have local fire, EMS, and firefighter departments responding, but oftentimes you're bringing in local adjacent counties and jurisdictions to assist. The way that common operation picture is managed today is through a traditional land mobile radio device, two-way communications. And while these devices are great in that they're ruggedized and fairly reliable and really purpose-built, they come with their own limitations. So when you have a large number of responders, large number of talk groups, you have high volume of traffic, and oftentimes when someone's communicating, they will use their push-to-talk capability on the radio where they grab the floor and nobody else can communicate over them, which is really important to have, but can prove to be inefficient when trying to maintain this large-scale situational awareness. On top of that, you often see that voice-only communications don't necessarily always convey the meaning that comes with a more face-to-face dialogue. So oftentimes people are using gestures and interacting to impart some of that communication and that meaning. So it can be somewhat limiting for a situational awareness tool. So the question is, how can we use enhanced user interfaces to create a positive impact for future first responder tasks? Looking at things like haptics, augmented reality, enhanced audio cues, or maybe things even beyond that. So we are the Public Safety Communications Research Division. We fall under the Department of Commerce, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and we operate in one of the newest laboratories at NIST, the Communications Technology Lab. NIST is the nation's measurement laboratory. We hold the atomic clock and up until recently also the kilogram. So we're really focused on the metrology aspects and creating standards and guidance for a variety of research areas. Within PSCR, we're really focused on enabling the creation, the development, and the evaluation of new communications and new technologies for the first responder community. We have a variety of research portfolios within our division, including things like mission critical voice, where we are working on ensuring that things that operate on a traditional land mobile radio system can function on a cellular-based device, a mobile device. We're also looking at improving location-based services, where we're looking at obtaining sub-1 meter accuracy on the X, Y, and Z plane for a first responder in an indoor environment, enabling better pre-planning, better mapping information, and then taking that data and providing enhanced navigation to our first responders. We also have research areas on cybersecurity, resilient systems, data analytics, and my team, we're focused on the UI, UX elements of those. So how do we ensure that all these great outputs that are coming out from these different research areas are going to be conveyed to that end user in an intuitive and non-invasive manner? The first round of devices that first responders are going to be using as they migrate over from traditional land mobile radio systems to a cellular-based environment are going to very much look like the commercial cellular devices that you and I use. So the tapping, the swiping, the pinching, and zooming. It's not really conducive when you're wearing 50 pounds of personal protective equipment and you have your hands encumbered with equipment or dealing with patients. So our division was created back in 2012 through the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, same legislation that created FirstNet, which is that national public safety broadband network that our first responders will be using for accessing and using those mobile devices. But that legislation provided NIST with $300 million to conduct R&D for enhancing public safety communications. Within the legislation, we have some specific language to focus on that mission critical voice and that land mobile radio to LTE interoperability. But we were also tasked with looking 10 to 15 years out on kind of futuristic technologies that could enhance the way that public safety operates. So we do a lot of internal R&D working with our public safety colleagues, but we also push a lot of that funding out through our open innovation program, where we're able to engage the public, industry, and academia through our grants and prize challenges mechanisms. So within the user interface and user experience portfolio, we're really, again, focused on how do we improve that interaction between our customer base, our first responder community, and the technologies that they're using. And we kind of take a two-pronged approach to tackling that. The first is, any traditional usability approach or human factors approach, and that's better understanding our users, where they operate, their environments, the tasks they conduct, the type of equipment they use. And to do that, you really need to interface and meet with your customer base. So we have a group dedicated to learning more about the technology needs and wants from the first responder community. And how we go about that is kind of a mixture of qualitative and quantitative approaches. So over an 18-month period of time, we went out and conducted over 200 interviews across the country, meeting with fire, law enforcement, EMS, and dispatch centers, across urban, suburban, and rural environments, and came up with some early analysis and insight onto today's technology gaps. We then recently launched a large-scale survey targeting a significant representation of the estimated 4 million first responders in the U.S. And came back with over 7,000 survey responses that will essentially substantiate some of those early findings from our qualitative interviews and help really highlight what those technology gaps are and what those needs and wants are of that first responder community. The other way we approach this is using technology that is available today, and that is virtual reality and augmented reality. We like using virtual reality in that it's a great tool. It's safe and relatively low cost for conducting some of this testing. We don't have to do a live burn at a firefighter training center or bring in a bunch of actors to do a mock traffic stop to test a piece of technology. And because we create these environments and control the environments, we can repeat them. And being a measurement laboratory, we really like to repeat things because it means we can measure things. So we're able to build in instrumentation that can measure the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the level of user satisfaction around the various interfaces that are integrated into these environments. So we work closely with our public safety colleagues. We have a team of developers here out in Boulder, Colorado, and we essentially create all these environments from the ground up for the purpose of being leveraged by the public. So these are open source environments. They're available today to download, and they consist of a variety of environment scenarios and tasks that allow the industry, academia, and vendor community to essentially use to do some rapid prototyping of various types of technologies. And as I mentioned earlier, we are leveraging the public for collaborating with a lot of these research endeavors. And the main means that we're going about doing that is through grants and prize challenges. I think within PSCR as a whole, we have over 50 grantees working with us, over $50 million awarded over the past 2 years. And for the user interface track, we had 7 awardees and cooperative agreements for around $6.5 million awarded last year. I'm currently working on a 2 to 3 year period of performance. And we'll talk about the grantees a little bit here on the next few slides. And then from a prize challenge perspective, last year we launched a challenge around creating the ideal heads-up display using these virtual reality environments and test beds, where the contestants had to convey a certain amount of navigational information to the end user and allow them to essentially navigate through a complex office environment and conduct a search and rescue mission. And then this year, we're looking at the relevancies of another type of interface, haptic interfaces, but expanding from just one kind of environment, which was the firefighter indoor navigation, but encompassing now some EMS and law enforcement scenarios as well. But before we go into details on the grants and prize challenges, I'd like to diverge a little bit and talk about a recent tech search that we had conducted, kind of looking at the baseline cost for typical R&D and usability testing. We feel pretty strongly that leveraging VR to do some early usability development and prototyping is impactful, but we didn't really have a true understanding of what today's baseline is. So we targeted, or we requested that Yet2 reach out to their global network and investigate what the typical life cycles are for, or the R&D cycles are for technologies that have a strong user interface component, whether that's a heads-up display, a wearable, haptic, etc. And of the 75 plus targets or companies that they showcased, we selected a subset of those that had a strong emphasis on public safety, and they conducted interviews with them and presented results for 13 of those companies. They also coupled that with some more informal surveys conducted at CES this year, targeting more of kind of a startup type network. So the first outcome of that report was highlighting an issue that I think is pretty well known in the development company, and that is it's far more costly to fix something after it goes to development or after it's deployed to the field as an operational entity. It can cost 10 times as much for catching it in development and over 100 times more if people are already using it out in the public. And that factored in usability studies early on in the design can result in efficiencies of over 700%. The second issue was focused much more around our public safety companies that are developing products for first responders. Typical usability testing using environments that can be risky or hazardous, you're seeing $40,000 to $60,000 per instance or per round of testing. For non-hazardous environments, more simplified testing, whether that's in-house or outsourced, you're seeing a range of $10,000 to $30,000. And then when you're doing testing in a more realistic environment, where you're going to say a firefighter training center, where you're doing simulated smoke, maybe a controlled fire burn, bringing in a lot of off-duty firefighters for the day, you're seeing cost of up to $50,000, and that's for a single day, maybe a single round of testing. And oftentimes, you're seeing at least 3 rounds of this type of testing before the companies are comfortable with where they are in the development cycle to move forward. So it can be a fairly costly endeavor. We also heard that it could take 3 weeks to a month for an environment to become available again, and for the time for the initial analysis and kind of iteration on the prototype design before you can get back to some of those environments to conduct these tests. So this could be a fairly costly endeavor from a resource perspective, both from time and cost. Additionally, a lot of these testing are occurring in a hazardous environment, and a lot of times, especially early on, these developers have maybe their first or second version of their prototype that's pretty precious to them. So they can be a little hesitant in deploying one of these prototypes in an environment where there's smoke or fire, or there's a risk of this device being dropped. So sometimes they may put off doing those early rounds of prototyping, or early rounds of testing with those early prototypes until they're a bit further down in their development cycle. And then one other benefit that we heard was that a lot of times these companies are tapping into a local area with maybe just a handful of users to test the equipment. And what they're finding is that a lot of the issues that are being highlighted in these products may not actually be around the usability of the device, but more in line with personal preference. So for example, they might hear feedback from their test group that this color blue should really be red. And in the grand scheme of things, when they go to deploy it across the country, across their user base, that small change didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So they're spending resources where they don't necessarily have to. So being able to use a virtual environment where you are able to integrate your prototype, it's very cost efficient to essentially ship these units across the country, have a diverse user base and maybe an enhanced larger user base that's geographically dispersed, try out these products, grab the metrics, the measurements from the scenario runs, grab the feedback from the questionnaires, and then send that information back to the developer. You can have much more impactful usability testing. So the main takeaway from the tech search was that whether a company was a small startup with 10 folk or a large-scale corporation with thousands of employees that's been around for quite some time, that there could be potential savings of 1 to 4 weeks in the early rounds of prototyping with the estimated savings of 20 to 30%. But that was caveated with, in almost all cases, you're ultimately going to have to test these prototypes in a more realistic environment where you're inducing physical stress and operating in the PPE or the traditional environment that the device will ultimately be exposed to, which we're entirely on board with. We, again, think VR is a great tool for doing some of that early prototyping, but is just a stepping stone to something that's tested in AR, and then something that's tested in a more realistic condition. So we mentioned that we had 7 awardees from the grant that we launched last year, and these are the participants, a nice mixture of industry and academia. And these institutes are focused on one of 2 tasks that came from that funding opportunity. Either looking at technology and content development for enabling better usability testing, training, and development in a virtual reality environment, or conducting specific research around the transferability of what we're doing in VR to real-world implementations. And here we're just highlighting some of the work that these 7 entities are currently working on. So of those 2 main goals, there were about a dozen objectives that the grantees could focus on, whether that's working on creating more immersive environments through using passive haptics, enhanced prototypes, or overlaying virtual images on physical objects, to finding ways to induce cognitive load or physical stress when your participants tethered to a computer 10 feet away. Also had entities looking at figuring ways to improve measurements within a virtual environment. So especially around measuring cognitive load. Early research we were conducting, we were leveraging EEG to measure cognitive load, but we found with the headsets and kind of the natural movements you have when working through some of these scenarios, you get a lot of false positives or a lot of noise coming off these devices. So we recently switched over to FNIRS, frequency near infrared spectrometry, as a better tool for for measuring some of that cognitive load on our participants. And then we even have some grantees focused on creating smart or artificially intelligent user interfaces where they're conveying specific information to the end user based on the context and where they are in the environment or in their operation. And then we're also doing a lot of prototyping with augmented reality. We're using a lot of the traditional COTS equipment available today, devices like the HoloLens, Magic Leap, and Vuzix Enterprise Blade. And we're creating a lot of proof of concepts or demonstrations that we can kind of put in front of a first responder and have them better understand what augmented reality is and the potential applications for their job. One limitation we're kind of faced with today is just the state of the hardware of augmented reality, and that the form factor, the battery life, and the field of view aren't really to the point where we can hand it over to a firefighter and say, hey, you can use this for conducting a search and rescue or running into a burning building. But it's a great tool to kind of prototype and show them the potential application of the technology as the hardware continues to improve, the form factor decreases, the battery life improves, and becomes a much more viable option for deployment in the field. We've created a variety of demos. Here we're highlighting our work that we did with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, their explosive ordnance division, where we created a training aid for a new employee becoming familiar with an IED device. And here you can kind of take the model and expand it into a wireframe mode so you can learn more about the componentry, and then the users posed with various questions. We also created a prototype around conveying navigation information for a firefighter, so drawing waypoint indicators on the ground to help them find a victim that's in the building. And then most recently, we've been using the Vuzix Enterprise Blades because they have a nicer form factor, looks like a pair of glasses that you or I could wear, much easier to hand over to our customer base and for them to see the potential application in the field. And we use that to create a futuristic traffic stop. So we worked with our law enforcement colleagues, and we're inquiring with them kind of what's the ideal information that you would like to see during a traffic stop about a driver or subject that you're interacting with. And almost all of them said, they don't want to see text, they don't want to be burdened with a large amount of information on the screen because that's going to take their eyes away from the subject that they're interacting with. And the slightest movement by them that isn't detected could potentially put them at risk. So we went with a very streamlined application where you're able to hold up a license of the driver, the camera on board can do a quick query and come back with a blue color flash for kind of a good citizen, and an orange color flash with a vibro-tactile feedback on the bridge for somebody that has wants and warrants on them. So just this subtle indicator that's going to increase their situational awareness and hopefully result in a better outcome for all those involved. So last year we ran a challenge around creating the ideal heads-up display that can convey navigational information to a participant. We created a complex office space that had hazards that blocked routes, so the subjects were only able to go one of two ways to find their victim, and then along the way we had a little explosion occur that blocked the route and required them to reroute. So we handed this environment over to our contestants, and they developed a variety of solutions, as you can see here. We started with 18 contestants during the concept phase, and we ended up with 6 finalists actually coming out to our conference, our stakeholders conference last year, where they were able to showcase their various solutions to about the 500 attendees coming from communications and first responders disciplines. And it was really great in that we could showcase the capabilities of VR to essentially do some rapid prototyping in a pretty quick manner and essentially showcase all these different types of solutions to our customer base and allow them to don the headsets, use the different user interfaces and conduct the task. And one thing that was surprising was everyone kind of came in with this preconceived notion that having a map of the environment was the best thing. People really wanted to know what the environment looked like and where they are in relation to that. And from a quantitative perspective, it performed the worst as far as being able to navigate the person through in a fairly quick manner. Because every time the person would travel in the environment, they had to look back at the mini-map, figure out where they were, reorientate themselves, and then continue down the road. In the top left, these first two solutions actually had the cleanest interface, very streamlined. They simply drew a line or some arrows on the ground to assist in that navigation. And they ultimately performed the best and walked away with $25,000 each of that $125,000 prize purse. So this past year, we've been working pretty closely with our public safety colleagues from EMS, law enforcement, and fire. And we essentially enhanced our virtual reality environments and just released these about a month ago as open source. And these environments are now comprised of emergency medical services scenario where you're triaging patients and conducting vital monitoring on a variety of subjects. Law enforcement environment where you're in a parking garage and we're testing situational awareness as a variety of targets pop up. And then again, kind of building on that firefighter navigation environment that we had last year. However, we had the opportunity to go out and conduct some training with a local firefighter academy. We took our development team out there and we're really exposed to the actual environments that a firefighter operates in. So we went back and we enhanced our environment. It's a little more polished now, but now we give you this nice overlay of smoke where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. So you essentially are mirroring more realistic conditions where a typical firefighter is probably crawling on their hands and knees, kind of swooping to the area as they're doing their search and rescue task. And this is a snapshot of that law enforcement environment where we're really looking at the ability of an interface to help with situational awareness, and in this case specifically help direct gaze. It might be a little jittery on this webinar, but I assure you our environments are crafted to minimize cyber sickness, so we make sure that they're fluid and they work very well within the headset. So we'll see if we can get this to play. There we go. So in this environment, we have created a situation where your partner is incapacitated, so you're essentially having to cover their view as well. There's roughly 200 degrees field of view that you have to constantly scan to locate these metal targets that are popping up. And what we're doing is essentially timing or measuring the time it takes to locate and engage a target and your success in being able to essentially engage with all the targets in the environment. Now, when we say engage, we don't necessarily mean your accuracy and be able to shoot the target because that's not the intent of the scenario. So as long as you kind of hit in the general direction, we give the participants credit for that. But here we're able to showcase how we have some built-in measurements where we're able to kind of compete the various interfaces that are integrated into this environment to show which ones prove to be the most effective and efficient. So we launched a challenge this past March using those three environments, and the challenge was really about assessing the relevancy of haptics and how they could impact first responders' operations. And I know this talk is, or this group is largely focused on AR. You could have just as easily swapped the haptics for an audio cue style system or a visual aid. The environments are built that they're agnostic to the type of interface that's integrated here. But we created a challenge for developers to essentially craft these prototypes, integrate them in the virtual environments, and then from there progress to an actual live test to see how well the prototypes can be improved within that virtual space. And then the contestants here are competing for a prize purse of $425,000. What's interesting about this challenge is that we brought in two different types of contestants. So not only are we dealing with kind of the development teams, the kind of the tinkerers, the hackers, the people that come up with the ideal solution or concept on how they would solve this challenge, but we also brought in haptic providers, the people that actually manufacture haptic devices like vibrotactile feedback devices, force feedback devices, or even thermodynamics. Again, we launched the challenge back in March through kind of a concept and teaming phase. We're now in phase 3 where the teams are developing their prototypes, integrating them into the virtual environment, kind of tapping into those hooks where we have all those various tasks that we're measuring. And then they'll be coming out to our stakeholders conference in 2 weeks where they'll showcase that to, again, our approximately 500 attendees comprised of first responders and communication experts. They'll be able to gather feedback, what works well, what doesn't for those prototypes. And then we allow those teams to go back and basically iterate on their design, improve their prototypes before they do a final submission for VR. And then in phase 5 of this challenge, we're going to have successful contestants actually take their prototype that they developed for the firefighter scenario. We're going to have them integrate that into actual firefighter PPE. So your bunker gear, your jackets, your boots, your pants, your flame hood, helmet, mask. They'll integrate that into the PPE, and then we'll actually have the judges wear the PPE with the prototypes and go through a firefighter training center in the Denver area and see how well these interfaces actually work under realistic conditions when there's simulated smoke and you're crawling on the floor wearing all this gear and hooked up to an air pack and SCBA mask. So how are we going about testing for these human factors and this usability? I've kind of touched on it before, but what we're not doing is just saying, you know, this is common sense, or these are fancy user interfaces, or you know, just look nice for the end user. But that is not good usability engineering or testing, and it's certainly not the designers or the developers sitting in a back office kind of crafting these solutions. We stress in all of our engagements, whether that's grants, internal R&D, or prize challenges, that the entities have to engage with public safety organizations and have them work closely with fire, law, and EMS. And in fact, for our grants, we required it. To be successful as an applicant, you basically had to show that you were engaged and had a significant level of effort with a local public safety organization. What we do focus on is that user-centered approach, or in this case, that first responder-centered approach. So we're looking at our users and how they operate, their characteristics, their limitations, what the operation environments and tasks are, and then probably most importantly, instrumenting or having the ability to measure the level of usability. Again, that is that efficiency, the effectiveness, and that level of user satisfaction of that end user. And for these environments and for this challenge, the way we're going about evaluating this, again, is that combined kind of qualitative and quantitative evaluation of those devices. So we have a judging panel that consists of active law, fire, and EMS, as well as our communications experts that'll actually don all the prototypes, both in the virtual reality settings and in the realistic environments. And they will evaluate essentially these different solutions. We also do a round of compliance checking. So we want to make sure that we're not posing any risk or harm to our judging panel that's actually trying out the equipment. And then we really focus on those usability metrics. So the efficiency, how well is this technology helping the user perform their task? the effectiveness, how accurate that technology is in repeated runs, and then kind of that satisfaction element where we're looking at more the look and feel and the ergonomics and kind of how well that overall interface is as far as ease of use and intuitive to follow. So we combine that in the form of a questionnaire to the built-in measurements in those virtual reality scenarios. So for this challenge, again, we'll have kind of 2 rounds of evaluation. The first is in the virtual reality space, where we'll be in the lab environment with the kind of traditional virtual reality gear, using those prototypes that are created by our contestants. And then in the final phase, we'll be heading out to West Metro Fire and Rescue Training Center, where we'll be going into that commercial building, wearing that 50 pounds of PPE in the air packs and going through an environment where, again, you can't see your hand in front of your face, and see how well those devices that were developed and refined in the earlier phases using the VR testbed actually perform under those realistic conditions. So I kind of touched on a variety of our work from both an internal R&D perspective and an external collaboration. But if these topics do interest you and you want to learn more, we will be having our annual conference. It's in Chicago, Illinois this year, July 9th through 11th. We'll have over 70 sessions touching on every internal R&D project and every piece of work that our grantees are conducting, as well as a host of demos throughout the week. If you're not able to join us, we do record all these sessions and we do post them up online at pscr.gov. This year, for the 2019 stakeholders, you can anticipate those videos being available probably around the August-September timeframe. Last year, we also recorded all of our sessions from the 2018 stakeholders meetings, and those are also available on pscr.gov. And then if you're in the Colorado area and you'd like to come out and visit our lab, feel free to reach out. We love kind of sharing what we're working on and engaging with new faces. So with that, I thank you all for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yep, thank you very much indeed, Scott. And just to remind you, listeners there, if you have any questions, if you can please type them into the questions box now. We'll just give you a kind of a few minutes. Whilst you're doing that, perhaps I'll ask Scott a question. You know, kind of what timeline are you seeing some of these trials? When do you think something will be available? I know it's a crystal ball question, but will be available actually in the first responder kind of environment and stuff like that. Is there a plan for that at the moment?
So let me just make sure I understand the question. Is it what is the timeline for actually deploying a functional user interface, whether that's AR, haptic, or other, to the field for a first responder?
Yeah, correct. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So no, our hope is that in a relatively short time frame, maybe, and for that means maybe 2 to 3 years for us, we can actually have some of these outputs from our work with the grantees, some of the early prototypes that we're developing in the prize challenges, or through just industry and academia leveraging the VR testbed environments, actually being able to be used in the field. What we do often is bring in co-sponsors for a lot of our activities from industry that can, one, provide guidance on kind of developing for the end user, things to take into consideration as you're developing these prototypes, so providing valuable insight from that perspective. But then these same co-sponsors are able to kind of leverage the outputs and kind of carry on the relationship with our contestants and our grantees to hopefully turn that into some sort of a business opportunity and create a viable product.
Cool. Thank you, Scott. We have a question from Mark. Mark Williams, just trying to clarify, and Scott might be able to answer, but there was a mention about environments being available for download somewhere. Did he hear?
Yeah, so on our NIST GitHub page, we have all of our environments listed. So when I say environments, I mean, like a residential facility, a high-rise building, that parking garage, a highway scene. And then in each of those environments, we will craft a variety of scenarios, whether that's a traffic stop or a mass casualty incident where you're triaging on the side of the highway, or if you're conducting a search and rescue in a commercial building, or conducting, like a wants and warrants issue for law enforcement in that same environment. So we attempt to get maximum reuse of these environments because, again, we build them all in-house from the ground up. It's a certain level of effort, and we feel that being able to craft multiple scenarios with multiple tasks that are measured or instrumented with measurements to detect the performance are pretty crucial to the effectiveness of this test bed. And the environments, again, are on the GitHub page. If you search for, I believe, PSCR, it should come up. Alternatively, the most recent environments were posted on our prize challenge site, which is publicsafetyhaptics.com, and there's a direct link there to download all the scenarios.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. And thank you, Mark, for the question as well. Okay, well, a little bit longer than 40 minutes, but I find that very useful indeed and very interesting. And thank you, Scott, for kind of leading not only this webinar but this initiative as well. I know there was a note from Captain McKinsey, who's a friend of the area, and we've done some stuff together. And we'll follow up with you with the email as well. And if there are no other questions, entered late. Okay, Scott, we've got that. We'll follow up with you with that as well. So want to again thank Scott for his time and presentation today. We'll be sending you a link of this so you can follow up and listen to it again. It will also be available on the area website. If anybody's got any questions about the area and what we do, please feel free to email me at mark@thearea.org. And thank you for listening, and I wish you all the very best. And again, Scott, thank you very much for your insight today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate you all dialing in. Take care.
Thank you. Cheers. Goodbye.